Anyone else wishing to speak to Bill 20? Member Calgary Mountain View.
Speaker, pleased to speak to Bill 20, Climate Leadership and Implementation Act. This truly is a shift in government policy. I think many of us welcome the need for serious action on climate change. It proposes to create two new statutes, the Climate Leadership Act and the Energy Efficiency Alberta Act. The Climate Leadership Act will give the government the authority to establish the carbon levy and consumer rebates. The Energy Efficiency Alberta Act establishes Energy Efficiency Alberta, a new agency that will provide programs and information to help people reduce their energy consumption, which would have it operating January 2017. The bill also proposes to amend the Alberta Corporate Tax Act to reduce the small business tax rate, which will help some small businesses adjust to the price of carbon. And effective January 1st, 2017, that rate will be lowered from 3% to 2%. The bill also proposes to amend the Personal Income Tax Act and the Climate Change and Emissions Management Act. All of these point to a recognition that carbon tax is a recognized international approach to reducing people's use and burning of carbon. By many counts, the fairest, the simplest, the most equitable approach to producers and consumers of carbon-based fuels in shifting the priorities for fuel use to lower carbon and zero carbon emissions. Clearly, this is an important step and one that, in principle, I fully support. The question, I guess, for many of us is that, along with some of the other changes that have been made, will have exactly what impact on carbon and what impact on people's residential, commercial, industrial costs. And given the decision to phase out coal, the decision to target at least 30% of renewables as the part of the energy mix replacing coal by 2030. And it's not clear whether that is 30% of generation capacity or 30% of generation. And those two are very different in terms of what they would require. Obviously, a lot more renewable energy would be required to provide the generation as opposed to having the capacity, because with just the capacity, we'd have to have a lot of backup. We'd have to have a lot of, presumably, natural gas backup. And one could argue that this is an optimal time for making this transition, low prices in natural gas, the importance to the economy that we maintain some of our operations and some of our commitments to the fossil fuel industry, which has produced such surpluses of gas now, and also surpluses in the past of our financial resources to build the schools, the hospitals, the roads, all that we have come to appreciate in this province. Having said that, I think part of the challenge in this bill and the related bill, or the related decisions, the policy decisions around the coal phase-out and the timing of the coal phase-out, the options then for a renewable with a backup fossil fuel secure base of electricity, and given that we are producing already 4,000 megawatts over what is actually required in Alberta today, there doesn't seem to be a lot of incentive to build new technology in this province. So the business case, the investment case, unfortunately isn't here today. And so this is an unfortunate, I guess, convergence of a lot of different issues that now challenge. Who was that? Oh. Thank you. Thank you. If I could continue, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I haven't been here for very long. First time that's happened to me, actually. So the question of the balance between renewable energy, which is clearly needed, is clearly the future, and the backup, the balance between those two, and how that either creates the business case for investment or discourages investment, I think is a critically important one. And that's why in the House I've been asking questions about what the cost benefit is of investing in the next 15 years, in what proportion of renewables and what proportion of gas-fired electrical energy, and what that impact would have on the carbon levels that we're trying to achieve, how that would impact the cost of electricity in Alberta, and indeed what jobs would be created by that. Where is the sweet spot there in terms of the balance between renewables, natural gas-fired electricity, and the results that we all want to see, lower carbon, more jobs, and an alternate economy here. And it doesn't look like the government has yet done that work, which makes it difficult. I mean, obviously every bill has some incompleteness to it, but I would have thought that the climate change panel would have some of those numbers. And it's not clear to me that throwing into the mix some of the changes that have occurred, that we know enough about what the appropriate mix is. Having said that, one of the most fundamental things that we could ask of the government is that they put in place performance targets into this bill. How will we measure over the next year, 2, 3 years, whether this climate change bill is achieving its purpose in terms of carbon reductions, the cost of electricity, the jobs created? So I will be making an amendment in due course, suggesting an amendment in due course, not today, but to that effect, and recognizing that all the pieces are not necessarily in place, but we have here a bill that is taking us a good deal of the way towards less dependence on fossil fuels, stronger connection to the climate and our commitment to future generations, and a recognition of the science that has been ignored in this House for the 12 years that I've been here, and much longer by some measures. We could learn from the BC example, where they brought in a carbon tax 8 years ago, and they have done, they have monitored that, and they have got, I would argue, the economic benefits from that, the job benefits from that, and the carbon reductions that may or may not be totally associated with that carbon tax, but they have been associated with the balancing of the other elements of appropriate public policy around electrical generation and job creation. So hopefully we can learn something from the BC example. And again, this is part of a national approach to climate. I'm delighted to see the federal Liberal government taking leadership there. This province is taking leadership together with the other provinces. Hopefully we can find some common ground and start making some real impact on the carbon emissions coming out of Canada and showing some leadership. Obviously, Canada isn't the big producer of carbon emissions on the planet. China and India are the big ones, with the US. But Alberta, on a per capita basis, puts out more carbon than any other country in the world. I think we have to acknowledge that. On a per capita basis, we produce far more carbon than almost anywhere else in the world. And leadership is what the world is looking for. If not Alberta, who is going to start to show some real leadership on this critically important issue that relates to health effects, water issues, extreme weather events, new infectious diseases. It may not be entirely due to human activity, but surely the indications are that a very substantial part of the warming going on the planet is related to human activity and carbon-based fuels. Methane is another big source, of course. Methane is something like 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas, and we have lots of leaking wells, as far as I'm aware. I don't think we're taking that as seriously as we should and could. I hope the Alberta Energy Regulator, I hope Alberta Environment is looking at that as a very serious part of a climate change plan that will actually have an impact. And I'll be pushing very much for that, especially in northeastern Alberta. My understanding, the soft soils, the tundra, very significant amount of methane leaking, and testing hasn't been assiduous. The accountability hasn't been strict. The cost of remediating small leaks is significant relative to some returns on some wells, and that makes it much more difficult for both the industry and government to get serious about some of the ongoing leaking that's going on across the province, but particularly in the northeast. So those are some of my comments. I appreciate the leadership, and I think we need to know much more than we do. And I think the government has some of this information. I think I would ask that they put it out there. Let's have more discussion around what is the appropriate balance to get the optimal results in terms of the economy, new jobs, carbon reductions, and electricity costs. Thank you.